At my dad's retirement dinner, he raised his glass and said, "Only the children who made me proud are truly mine." Everyone laughed, clinked their glasses, toasted to his legacy. Then he looked straight at me, the daughter who became a veterinarian, not a corporate executive, not a lawyer, and said, "You can leave." The room went silent. Forks froze mid-o. I stood up slowly, my chest burning like someone had pressed hot coals against my ribs. Cameras kept rolling. My father smiled, and I realized humiliation was part of his carefully rehearsed speech. But before I could take a single step toward the exit, my husband stood too. And what he did next silenced every person in that crystal chandeliered room. I'm about to share something that still keeps me awake some nights. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love knowing how far a story like this can reach. It reminds me I'm not alone in what happened. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. The night my father retired, Boston was drowning in November rain, the kind that turns the city grey and makes everything feel heavier than it should. By the time my husband Julian and I arrived at the Fairmont Grand Ballroom, my heels were soaked through and my heart already felt like it was sinking. I'd rehearsed what I'd say to him. "Congratulations, Dad." Maybe even a quiet, "I'm proud of you too." But when I stepped into that glittering room filled with crystal chandeliers and camera crews, I knew there wouldn't be space for any of that. The banner above the stage shimmered in gold, Whitmore Education Alliance and Brightstone Tech Foundation. $6 million commitment. Everything screamed prestige: Waterford crystal, ivory silk linens, a string quartet playing softly beneath polite conversation. My father, Dr. Lawrence Whitmore, stood at the center, shaking hands with university presidents and Fortune 500 CEOs. He was the image of what the education world called excellence: tall, commanding, expensive-looking. And somewhere deep down, I still wanted his approval. We were 10 minutes late. My stepmother Vanessa didn't miss the chance to note it. "Always running on her own schedule," she said with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her sequined gown reflected the chandelier light in perfect rhythm with her calculated charm. "Don't worry, dear. We saved you a good spot." But as I scanned the VIP table, the one positioned directly in front of the cameras and corporate sponsors, my name wasn't there. Next to my father's place card, the seat read, "Sienna Marshall, Vanessa's daughter, rising investment banker." I blinked, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Vanessa followed my gaze. "You'll find your name at table 22, she said smoothly. "We thought you'd be more comfortable with the other service professionals." Service professionals. The words landed like a slap. Table 22 was tucked behind a marble column at the far end of the ballroom, practically hidden from view. I could already see the difference: cheaper linens, wilted centerpieces, the faint smell of too much air freshener trying to mask something stale. I nodded once, jaw tight. As we made our way there, the sound of laughter and champagne toasts echoed behind us. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sienna glide toward the stage with Vanessa, already shaking hands with donors like she'd inherited the throne. My father didn't look at me. Not even once. Julian's fingers brushed mine. "Don't react yet," he whispered. His voice was calm, too calm for what was happening. He pulled out his phone, typing something quick. I caught the screen flash. "Ready." Whoever he was texting replied instantly. Table 22 sat in the shadows, half hidden behind a pillar draped with burgundy velvet. The laughter from the main tables reached us only as faint ripples, like echoes from another world entirely. Around me sat 5 other professionals, people who spent their lives caring for things others took for granted. Dr. Nina Flores, a pediatric nurse. Mr. James Sullivan, a firefighter. Mrs. Patricia Nguyen, a social worker. Their smiles were kind, tired, and familiar. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been invisible in this family long before tonight. Dr. Flores leaned toward me. "You were supposed to be on the advisory board, weren't you? Lawrence promised you that position." I nodded, trying not to let the bitterness slip into my voice. 3 years ago, he said when he retired, I'd help carry on the Foundation's mission. I built an entire proposal: programs for rural veterinary clinics, scholarships for underserved communities. Mr. Sullivan let out a dry laugh. "They don't want mission, Whitmore. They want money." Veterinarians don't look good in press photos next to tech executives. Across the room, Vanessa paraded Sienna from one camera crew to another. My father followed, his hand on her shoulder, introducing her as the next generation of leadership. The words hit harder than I expected. Julian excused himself from the table, phone pressed to his ear. "Check clause 8.2 and section 14, he said quietly before walking away. I didn't know what it meant, but the tone in his voice wasn't casual. It was surgical. I turned my focus back to the stage. Sienna was talking to a business journalist, her hand resting elegantly on the back of my father's chair. "The new advisory board has already been finalized," she said confidently. "No need for additional approvals." Something about that sentence caught in my mind like a hook. No need for approvals. It echoed in my head like a wrong note in a melody. At table 22, our silverware didn't match. The flowers were plastic. But the conversation was real. People talking about emergency room overcrowding, about families struggling to afford basic pet care, about kids who needed advocates in foster systems. While the main table toasted to innovation and corporate partnerships, we shared stories of lives held together by people who actually cared. I looked around and realized that table 22 wasn't just a seat in the back. It was a mirror showing everything my father's world chose not to see. Julian returned, sitting beside me again. His expression was unreadable, but I noticed the faint tension in his jaw, the way it tightened when he was working through something complex. He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Caldwell got the documents. He'll check his email when the time comes." I looked at him, trying to piece it together. "What are you doing?" His eyes didn't move from the stage. "Just trust me." Trust. The word felt foreign in that moment. But I did. Because in a room full of people who had erased me, he was the only one who hadn't. Vanessa's voice rose over the soft music. "This is Sienna, my daughter, the youngest vice president at Meridian Capital." She turned slightly toward us, her smile poisonous. "And that's Lawrence's daughter, Danielle. She works with animals. Such noble work." The pause before noble was deliberate, a dagger wrapped in silk. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. But Julian reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "Not yet," he mouthed. The ballroom lights dimmed again, and the giant LED screen behind the stage flashed a new headline: Whitmore Education Alliance Leadership Announcement. I already knew what was coming. The rhythm of my father's voice, the applause cued in advance, the polite laughter that always filled the gaps of his self-importance. But this time, I felt the edges of it cutting deeper. He smiled into the microphone as if speaking to history itself. "For 30 years, we've built this alliance on excellence, discipline, and vision. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the next generation of leadership." The audience leaned forward. I could see Vanessa standing at the base of the stage, her hand resting proudly on Sienna's shoulder. Cameras zoomed in. My name wasn't going to be called. "Please welcome the new board successor of the Whitmore Education Alliance, Sienna Marshall." The applause was deafening. The floor seemed to tremble with it. Sienna rose gracefully, brushing her perfectly highlighted hair behind her ear, and accepted the moment like it had always been hers. I sat perfectly still, watching the crowd rise for her, hundreds of people celebrating what had once been promised to me. 3 years of proposals, research, pilot programs, everything I'd built so the foundation would focus on communities that actually needed help. Not one word of acknowledgement. Not one glance my way. When Sienna began to speak, her voice was sharp, polished, rehearsed. She spoke about strategic growth, maximizing returns, partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. She never once mentioned communities. Never said the word service. The words rang hollow in the grand space, but the audience clapped anyway. I stared at her under the hot stage lights, realizing I was listening to the sound of my own erasure. Julian sat beside me, unmoved. He didn't clap. He just checked his watch, then glanced at someone near the stage, a distinguished older man I recognized as Dr. Theodore Caldwell, president of Brightstone Tech Foundation. Dr. Caldwell was typing something into his phone. I noticed the way Julian shifted in his seat, composed, calculating. I leaned closer. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. Vanessa leaned toward the MC near the stage. I caught just enough to hear her whisper, "Push the community recognition segment to the end." The man nodded obediently, shuffling his note cards. The program skipped straight to the sponsor presentation. The screen lit up again, Brightstone Tech Foundation in partnership with Whitmore Education Alliance. The logo pulsed bright and blue across the stage. My stomach tightened. I'd seen that logo before, on Julian's laptop at home weeks ago, when he said he was helping with grant reviews. I'd never asked details. Maybe I should have. Sienna posed for photographs with Vanessa and my father as the MC announced, "Let's welcome our sponsors to the stage for a photo with our new board appointee." Cameras flashed. Dr. Caldwell remained seated, his expression unreadable. I could almost feel the hum of tension in his silence. Something inside me broke. I pushed back my chair and stood. Vanessa turned immediately, intercepting me with that frozen smile she reserved for polite crises. "Danielle," she said quietly, "don't cause a scene. This is a family moment." I looked past her at my father, arm around Sienna, smiling at the press. "I'm family, aren't I?" I said. "Or is that conditional now?" Her smile twitched. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting." The air seemed to shift. Guests whispered. My father pretended not to hear me, still talking to the cameras. Julian rose slowly beside me, his hand brushing my arm. "Not yet," he whispered, the words deliberate, precise. "We are not asking for a seat. We are reading a contract." His voice carried a calm certainty that cut through the noise. For the first time, I noticed how steady his breathing was, like someone who'd been planning this for months. I followed his gaze toward Dr. Caldwell. He was scrolling through his phone, eyes narrowing at something on the screen. On stage, the music swelled and my father lifted his glass. I caught the faintest flicker of anxiety on Sienna's face as Dr. Caldwell stood up quietly and stepped toward the side of the stage, phone still in hand. I didn't understand what Julian was planning. I only knew he was waiting for something, an opening, a single moment where truth could split the room apart. The applause rolled again. My father smiled wider. But something in that sound had changed. It wasn't celebration anymore. It was the sharp edge of pride cracking. Then Julian moved. He walked straight toward the podium, his movements calm but purposeful. Every head turned. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the applause. "Before you continue, I'd like to address the room on behalf of Brightstone Tech Foundation." There was a ripple of confusion. My father blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" Dr. Caldwell raised a hand toward the MC. "Let him speak." Julian climbed the steps. The ballroom lights caught the subtle lines of his charcoal suit, and for the first time that evening, he looked every bit the man who belonged on that stage. Not by bloodline, but by command. He took the microphone. "Before this appointment becomes official, we should review the terms of the contract your alliance signed with Brightstone. Clause 8.2 outlines the requirement for active community professional representation on the board." Silence, the kind that hums right before a storm. My father's smile stiffened. "Mr. Chen, I don't recall inviting you to comment on internal decisions." Julian didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you should reread the agreement you signed 7 months ago." Cameras swiveled. Dr. Caldwell stepped closer, holding up his phone. "He's correct," he said. "I have the document. It requires prior sponsor approval before any leadership announcement." The audience murmured, unsure of what they were witnessing. My father's composure faltered. He turned to me, his voice sharp, desperate to reclaim authority. "You did this, didn't you? You brought him into this to embarrass me." I met his stare. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." Vanessa rushed to his side, whispering furiously, but her words were drowned out by the buzz spreading through the crowd. Reporters moved closer. Phones raised. The LED screen flickered, then went black. When it blinked back on, new text scrolled across it. Contract Clause 8.2, Active Community Professional Requirement. Gasps swept the room. My father's legacy, 30 years of unshakable reputation, suddenly looked fragile under a single paragraph of fine print. Julian stepped back, handing the microphone to Dr. Caldwell, who began reading aloud. Any appointment to the advisory board must include at least one current community professional and requires written approval from the sponsor prior to announcement. Failure to comply constitutes immediate breach of contract. The silence that followed wasn't polite anymore. It was judgment. My father's hand trembled on his glass. Vanessa turned pale. Sienna stood motionless, eyes darting between them. I stood at the edge of the stage, breath steady, for the first time that night. I looked at Julian, his face calm, unflinching. I realized he'd been building toward this all evening, setting the pieces one by one, while everyone else played pretend. My father tried to laugh it off, voice cracking under strain. "We'll resolve this privately," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "These are formalities." Dr. Caldwell's tone was firm. "No, Dr. Whitmore. This is the contract you signed, and it's binding." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to feel, pressing against your skin like humidity before lightning strikes. Cameras kept flashing. Somewhere, a server dropped a tray, the crash echoing like punctuation. Then Julian spoke again, his voice cutting through the chaos. "There's more," he said. He turned to the audience. "My name is Julian Chen. I'm the founder and CEO of Brightstone Tech Foundation." For 3 full seconds, the room stopped breathing. Camera flashes stilled. Even the orchestra faltered mid-note. The sound of Vanessa's champagne glass shattering against the floor filled the silence. My father's lips parted, but no words came. Sienna stepped forward, panic replacing her composure. "That's impossible. Brightstone's founder is anonymous." "Not anymore," Julian said simply. Security froze halfway up the aisle. Dr. Caldwell nodded slowly. "He's telling the truth," he said. "His foundation's documents list him as the primary signatory. This partnership exists because of him." Julian raised his hand toward the LED screen. The contract dissolved into a new slide, an email thread projected across the ballroom wall. "This," he said, "is from the Whitmore Alliance's legal office, sent by Ms. Marshall." He pointed at Sienna's name highlighted in yellow. "Here it says, and I quote, 'We'll announce first. They're just a sponsor. They don't have real authority.'" The room murmured like a low storm building. Vanessa's face turned the color of ash. Dr. Caldwell spoke again. "That statement alone constitutes a breach under Section 14.1. The partnership is void." My father lunged forward, his face red. "You came here to destroy me." "No," Julian said quietly. "You did that when you forgot what this alliance was built for." The noise rose again, reporters yelling questions, flashes lighting up the stage like strobes. My father tried to speak, but his words vanished beneath the rumble of whispers. For the first time in his life, the microphone was no longer his. I watched him sink into confusion. And for the first time, I felt no fear, just clarity. "For 3 years," I said, stepping forward, "I wrote proposals to support rural communities. 15 drafts, all ignored. You said they were too idealistic." I looked toward Dr. Caldwell. "Last year, I sent one of those drafts directly to Brightstone. It was called Community Care Network." Dr. Caldwell nodded. "That proposal is what led Brightstone to fund Whitmore Alliance in the first place." He turned to my father. "Your daughter's work brought you that $6 million sponsorship." Gasps rippled across the room. Julian lowered the microphone slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You see," he said softly, "sometimes standing up doesn't require volume. Just truth." My father slumped into a chair, staring at the floor. Vanessa tried to smile at a reporter, pretending control, while Sienna typed frantically on her phone, already trying to contain the fallout. I looked around at the faces, the cameras, the blinking red lights of live feeds capturing every second. He taught me to respect the spotlight, I thought. But he never told me what happens when it turns against you. Julian handed the microphone to Dr. Caldwell. "Effective immediately," he said, "Brightstone Tech Foundation withdraws its $6 million sponsorship from Whitmore Education Alliance." The sound that followed wasn't applause or gasps. It was the collective noise of a legacy collapsing, chairs scraping, urgent whispers, the shuffle of feet toward exits. And yet beneath it all, I felt something rare, Silence inside me. Finally, after years of being drowned out, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. By the time the orchestra stopped playing, the gala no longer felt like a celebration. Guests rushed toward the exits, heels clicking against marble, voices overlapping in disbelief. The hashtag Whitmore scandal had already started trending on screens behind the bar. Dr. Caldwell stood near the podium, speaking into a cluster of microphones as journalists surrounded him. As per the terms of the Brightstone contract, he announced, the Whitmore Education Alliance is now suspended from all sponsorship benefits pending investigation. A new governing body will be established. Vanessa stormed forward, pointing at Julian. You planned this. You set a trap for my family. Julian didn't even flinch. No, he said quietly. You built the trap. I just turned on the lights. My father rose unsteadily from his seat. The confidence that once defined him was gone, replaced by something smaller, rawer. You did this, he said to me, his voice low and shaking. Was it revenge? No, I said. It's the end of pretending education is just a stage for your ego. For the first time, I saw him hesitate, not out of pride, but disbelief. Like he couldn't understand a world where his authority no longer mattered. Julian stepped to the screen again. Before you call this unfair, he said, let's talk about integrity. He pressed a button and a new document appeared, Strategic Growth Initiative, draft by Sienna Marshall. Next to it, another file opened, my own proposal, the Community Care Network. Side by side, they were nearly identical. 42%, Julian said calmly. That's how much of her work your stepdaughter copied. Word for word. A hush swept the room. Sienna's face drained of color. We only referenced it, she stammered. Dr. Caldwell shook his head. This is plagiarism and a direct violation of the funding ethics clause. Reporters surged closer. Phones lifted. Somewhere a live feed replayed the moment on a giant monitor near the exit. The words #Whitmore scandal flashed in red, comments streaming. Father humiliates daughter on stage. Daughter's husband reveals massive fraud. My father's voice trembled. Caldwell, please. There must be a way to fix this, to save the alliance. Caldwell's reply was gentle but final. You can't save something built on broken promises. Julian turned toward the crowd. Brightstone will establish a new fund, one that belongs to the communities, not the boardrooms. Vanessa scoffed, but her voice barely carried over the noise. You think people will trust you after this? Julian smiled faintly. They'll trust the truth. Then I stepped closer to my father, my voice quiet enough to make him look at me. You once said, only the children who made you proud are yours. His eyes flickered, wounded. I took a breath. Then from now on, I'm not yours. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to pause. My words didn't echo. They landed, final and still. Dr. Caldwell spoke again, reading from his phone. Effective immediately, the $6 million partnership between Brightstone Tech Foundation and Whitmore Education Alliance is terminated. His tone was clinical, but the meaning reverberated like a sentence. My father's empire, his name, his influence, the identity he wore like armor, was gone in an instant. Julian turned to the press, his voice steady. Tonight, Brightstone reallocates all $6 million to create the Whitmore Renewal Fund, run entirely by active community professionals, by those who actually serve. The crowd erupted, flashes, shouting, chaos. But in the center of it all, I felt still. I looked at my father one last time. He sat in his chair, staring at nothing. His glass of champagne untouched, his reflection fractured in the crystal. Vanessa whispered something to him, but he didn't move. Julian reached for my hand. His grip was warm, grounding. I told you, he said softly. We don't need their table. We build our own. And as the lights flared across the ballroom, the golden letters of his name flickered and faded behind us. In that moment, I realized the night hadn't destroyed us. It had rewritten us. His empire was gone. Ours had just begun. 6 weeks later, the Fairmont Grand Ballroom was quiet again. No lights, no orchestra, no applause, just the echo of chairs being arranged for the first board meeting of the Whitmore Renewal Fund. I looked around the room that had once humiliated me. "This is where he told me to leave," I said. "Now it's where I sign our first grant." Julian smiled, flipping through a folder. "It's poetic, really. His ballroom. Our beginning." The fallout had been swift. My father was forced into early retirement. Vanessa left Boston without saying goodbye. Sienna's firm suspended her after the plagiarism review confirmed everything. News outlets called it the Whitmore scandal. Business schools used it as a case study on integrity. Meanwhile, Julian and I rebuilt. He took his rightful title, CEO of Brightstone and executive director of the new fund. I remained a veterinarian, just as I'd always been. The Whitmore Renewal Fund was already sponsoring clinics, professional grants, and scholarships. 140 organizations. 350 professionals. At our first press event, I stood at the podium and said, "If they don't give you a seat at the main table, build your own." On the wall behind me hung a plaque of reclaimed wood, engraved with the words, "For every professional who was told they were just doing noble work." During our board meeting, we deliberately kept the same corner where Table 22 once stood. "We'll keep it here," I said, "so we never forget where change begins." Dr. Caldwell walked over, smiling. "Then this corner is now the command center." Laughter filled the room, the kind that felt earned, light, human. Later that evening, Julian asked, "If your father calls again?" I smiled. "I'll answer. I don't need him to admit anything. I already did." He reached for my hand. "That's freedom." Before we left, I turned to the stage where it had all started. He said, "You can leave," I whispered. And I did. Then I came back with everyone they overlooked. "We don't sit at the back anymore. We are the table."